Warning disclaimer, the following story is a dramatized retelling of real events, based on a true confession. Names, locations, and some details have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. This story contains themes of emotional and moral conflict, including infidelity, guilt, and personal vulnerability. It is intended for mature audiences only. The purpose of this story is not to promote or glorify betrayal, but to reflect on the emotional realities many people face in relationships. It was one of those weekends when everything seemed to fall perfectly into place. The weather was warm but not too hot. The backyard was freshly mowed, and the grill was already smoking with barbecue. I had been planning this small get-together with my husband, Matt, for weeks. We invited close friends, some of mine, some of his, but it was Darren, Matt's best friend since college, who stood out that day. He arrived early, helped set up tables, carried heavy coolers without being asked, and charmed every guest with his easy smile and boy-next-door vibe. Darren had always been around our marriage, but never this close. He was single, kind, and always respectful. At least that's what I believed. The day went smoothly. Laughter echoed from the backyard while kids splashed in the inflatable pool. Beer bottles clinked, meat sizzled on the grill, and old college stories flowed endlessly. Matt, being the host, enjoyed every moment, but also drank a bit more than usual. By sundown, most guests began saying their goodbyes. Dishes were left half-cleaned, cups scattered around, and wrappers fluttering in the summer breeze. Matt, tipsy and sluggish, slurred, "I'll crash upstairs for a bit, babe." Darren said he'd help clean up a bit. I remember hesitating, but Darren smiled and said, "Don't worry. I won't let you do it all alone." I nodded. Maybe I was just too tired to argue. I watched my husband walk up the stairs, swaying slightly, unaware that the moment he disappeared from the room, something about the atmosphere between me and Darren subtly shifted. We were alone in the kitchen, surrounded by empty plates and silence, except for the muffled party playlist still humming from the Bluetooth speaker in the corner. At first, everything felt normal. Darren filled the dishwasher while I wiped the counters. We worked like a team, like two adults responsibly tidying up after the fun. But it didn't take long before I began noticing things that weren't there before. His sleeves rolled up, revealing the toned forearms I had never really looked at. The way he leaned against the sink, casually chatting as if we weren't the only two people awake in that entire house. Then came the compliments, soft ones at first, about how I handled everything so well, or how Matt was lucky. Harmless words. Maybe, but something about them lingered. Maybe it was how he looked at me when he said them. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew where this was going but pretended I didn't. There was no touch, no inappropriate move. Not yet. Just the beginning of a quiet shift, where a boundary began to bend, and a story I would one day regret had just started to write itself. The kitchen was quiet except for the occasional clinking of dishes and the soft thud of empty bottles hitting the trash. Darren and I moved around each other easily, almost too easily. There was a strange comfort in his presence, like we had done this before, even though we never had. He dried the plates while I wiped down the counters. Occasionally, we made eye contact that lingered a second too long. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. Maybe it was the wine earlier. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was the attention I wasn't used to receiving. Not like this. We started talking more freely. Not just small talk about the party, but deeper things. Darren asked me if I was happy living in the suburbs. I laughed and said, "Some days, yes. Some days I feel like I'm fading into the walls." I didn't mean to say that out loud. It just came out. He looked at me with concern, but not pity. He said, "I get that. I think you've given up more than you realize." His words hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't wrong. I noticed how he listened. Not like someone waiting for their turn to talk, but someone who was genuinely present. He asked me how long I had been with Matt. I told him, 10 years, 5 married. He asked if I ever felt invisible. I didn't answer. That silence, I think, said enough. Then something small happened that felt bigger than it should have. I reached for a glass at the same time he did. Our fingers touched. Normally, that would be nothing, but this time, he didn't move away. And neither did I. We both paused, hand over hand, eyes locked. There was electricity in the air, dangerous and undeniable. He smiled slightly, almost as if he knew I wouldn't pull away. That's when I realized something. I didn't want to pull away. It scared me, how quickly my emotional walls began to crumble. I hadn't felt noticed like this in years. Not in this way. Matt loved me, I knew that, but we had become routine, predictable, comfortable in the most emotionally distant way. I took a step back and laughed it off, saying something about how tired I was. Darren nodded, but the air between us was different now. Something had shifted permanently. I felt it. He felt it. There was tension, thick, palpable, and unresolved. I looked at the clock and realized it was past midnight. The dishes were done, the house was quiet, and my husband was still asleep upstairs, oblivious to the storm quietly building just one room below him. Darren didn't leave. He sat down at the kitchen island, poured a small glass of wine for himself, and looked at me. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. And for the first time that night, I didn't. I should have gone upstairs. That would have been the right thing to do. Say goodnight, walk away, in the night like nothing happened. But I didn't. Instead, I walked over to the wine cabinet, pulled out another glass, and sat across from Darren at the kitchen island. He raised his glass slightly with a half smile. I mirrored him. The wine was dry, smooth, and too easy to drink. It loosened something inside me that had already started to crack hours earlier. We talked, and this time, the filters dropped. He asked me things no one had asked me in a long time. "Do you ever feel like you're just existing?" he said. I answered honestly, "Most days, yeah. Like I'm doing all the right things, but feeling none of it." I heard the words come out of my mouth and realized how true they were. I had been running our household, managing life, cooking, cleaning, loving Matt the best I could, but all of it had become a cycle. Darren's presence, his attention, was like a light suddenly flickering on in a dark room I didn't know I was stuck in. There was something about the way he looked at me, not like someone who was trying to get something from me, but like someone who saw right through me. He leaned in just slightly, not in a way that crossed a boundary, but in a way that made me feel like he was already inside one. His voice dropped to a softer tone when he said, "You deserve more than routine." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because some part of me believed him. Silence fell between us, thick and loaded. He glanced at the wine glass, then back at me, and then he asked the question that changed everything. "Have you ever wondered what it would be like if we met first?" I didn't answer. I couldn't even breathe. I felt something in my stomach twist, not in disgust, not in fear, but in recognition, in longing, something I hadn't felt in years. I looked down, pretending to be unfazed, but my hands were shaking. And then, without warning, without planning, Darren stood up and walked over to my side of the island. Slowly, he sat on the stool next to mine. We didn't speak. The wine, the dim light, the emotional intimacy, it was all a slow-moving trap we both willingly walked into. I turned to say something, I don't even remember what, but before I could, he leaned in, inches away, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. I just needed to say it because I can't keep pretending I don't think about it." And then it happened. Our lips met. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't rough. It was soft, painful, and full of everything I'd been hiding. I pulled away almost instantly, breath caught in my throat. He didn't try to chase it. We both just sat there, stunned. The line had been crossed. Quietly, powerfully, and there was no way to undo it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside Matt, staring at the ceiling, wide-eyed and cold with shame. He snored softly next to me, his arm occasionally brushing against mine, as if still unconsciously reaching out for me in his sleep. That same arm, the one I used to hold with such devotion, now made me flinch. I felt like a thief lying next to someone I had stolen from. Not his money, not his things, but his trust. And he had no idea. Darren had left. Quietly, respectfully. After the kiss, he backed away, looked at me with something that resembled regret. Or was it longing? And simply said, "I'll go." No arguments. No begging. No drama. And then he was gone. Just like that. A man who had been in our lives for years, who had shared our dinners and holidays, now walked out the door, having taken something intangible with him. A piece of me I didn't know I was capable of giving. The guilt was thick and suffocating. I thought I was stronger than this. I had always judged people who cheated, who let feelings override vows. And yet there I was. It may have only been one kiss, no clothes removed, no bodies intertwined, but it felt far worse than physical. It was intentional. It was real. In the morning, Matt woke up refreshed and smiling. "You two got everything cleaned up?" he asked, stretching and kissing me on the forehead. I nodded and forced a laugh. I couldn't look him in the eye. That whole day, I went through the motions. Made breakfast, folded laundry, answered emails. But inside, I was unraveling. Every small moment between us, his hand on my back, his jokes, the way he thanked me for being amazing, they all made me sick to my stomach. Because he didn't know. He didn't see the storm I had let inside our home. At one point, Matt looked at me and said, "You've been quiet today. Everything okay?" I smiled and replied, "Just tired." And that was the truth. I was tired. Tired of lying, tired of hiding what I did, tired of pretending the kiss wasn't still replaying in my head on a loop. Darren hadn't messaged me. Not that day. Not the day after. A part of me was relieved. Another part of me felt abandoned, which made me even more disgusted with myself. How could I crave the attention of a man who had just made me betray my marriage? That night, I watched Matt sleep again, wondering if I should tell him. But I didn't. I convinced myself it would only hurt him. That it was just a kiss. That it meant nothing. But the truth was, it had meant something. And the fact that I couldn't say it out loud meant that it would stay inside me, quietly growing like a crack in the foundation of our life. 2 days passed before I heard from Darren again. I was folding laundry in the bedroom, the TV playing quietly in the background when my phone buzzed. A message. Just one. From him. "I am sorry. It shouldn't have happened. I won't bring it up again." That was it. No explanations, no emotions. Just that single, sterile apology, sent like a Band-Aid over a wound we both knew was still bleeding underneath. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Should I reply? Should I delete it? Should I show Matt? I didn't do any of those things. I simply locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the bed. But for the rest of the day, the weight of that message pulled at me. It reminded me that it really happened, that I wasn't just imagining the connection, the kiss, or the crack it had left in my life. Matt, of course, was still blissfully unaware. That evening, he was planning our next weekend getaway. He joked that we should invite Darren to tag along, so we could actually get some help again. The irony hit me like a slap. I laughed, but it felt hollow in my throat. In the following days, something shifted in me. My guilt didn't just stay in my chest. It started to show up in everything I did. I became quieter, more distant. I found myself overcompensating, more affectionate than usual, more accommodating than necessary. I cooked Matt's favorite meals. I kissed him longer. I said, "I love you," with an urgency I didn't understand. But underneath it all, I knew I was trying to bury something alive. One afternoon, while Matt was out, I found myself scrolling through old photos, pictures of us and Darren at holidays, birthday parties, vacations. He had been part of our life for so long. How had this line ever blurred? How had I let it? I realized then that it wasn't about Darren. Not really. It was about me. About the void I hadn't acknowledged. About the parts of me that felt neglected, unseen, or used up. Darren had simply noticed them. And that moment of being noticed was enough to push me over an edge I thought I would never approach. Still, I didn't respond to his message. I couldn't, because if I answered, it would mean I was opening the door again. And no matter how confused I felt inside, I wasn't ready to cross it a second time. But the silence between us, that was just as loud. It echoed every time Matt said Darren's name. It pulsed every time I looked at my husband and thought, he trusts me completely. And I kept wondering, do I even deserve that trust anymore? The guilt wasn't just eating at me anymore. It was controlling me. I catch myself staring at Matt while he was talking, wondering how he'd look at me if he ever found out. Would it be anger? Hurt? Disbelief? Or worse, would he see me as someone entirely different? Someone he no longer knew? One afternoon, I sat alone at our kitchen table, the same place where that kiss happened. Everything looked normal. The clean countertops, the fruit bowl, the family calendar stuck to the fridge. but I felt like a stranger in my own life. That's when Matt walked in from work, tossed his keys on the counter, and casually asked, "Hey, have you heard from Darren? He's been acting weird lately." The question dropped like a bomb. I froze. I knew that tone. Matt was concerned, but also suspicious. Not about me, not yet, but about his friend. And that terrified me even more. I forced a casual tone. "No, not really." "Why?" Matt shrugged. "I don't know. He's just been distant. Kind of like he's avoiding me." The irony almost made me laugh. Of course Darren was avoiding him. We both were. We were dancing around a lie neither of us had the courage to clean up. That night, I stood in the shower far longer than usual, letting the hot water beat down on me like it could rinse away what had happened. But it didn't. Nothing would. Not the apologies in my head. Not the justifications I kept whispering to myself. Not the silence. For the first time, I seriously considered telling Matt everything. The idea had haunted me for days, but now it felt like maybe confession was the only way I could breathe again. I practiced the words in my head, imagining every possible reaction. I even started a letter, but never finished it. Instead, I did something else. I booked an appointment with a therapist. Not for us, for me. Because I needed to understand why I let it happen. Not just the kiss, but the emotional opening that made space for Darren in the first place. I love Matt. I still do. But something was broken long before that night. And instead of facing it, I let someone else step into the cracks. During my first therapy session, I didn't even mention Darren's name. I just talked about feeling invisible, about losing my voice in the everyday noise of marriage and responsibility. The therapist nodded gently and said something I still remember clearly. People don't usually set out to betray the ones they love. They just get so used to being unheard that the first person who listens sounds like a savior. And in that moment, I realized something heartbreaking. I didn't cheat because I stopped loving my husband. I cheated because I stopped loving myself. Therapy didn't fix everything overnight, but it did peel back layers I had been avoiding for years. I talked about my marriage, my loneliness, my tendency to put everyone else first until I barely recognized myself. I didn't talk about the kiss for a few weeks. I didn't even say Darren's name. But every session brought me closer to the truth that I was too scared to say aloud. At home, Matt started noticing small changes in me. I was quieter, more reflective, sometimes more present, sometimes more distant. One night he gently asked, "Are we okay?" And I wanted to scream no. I wanted to spill everything, to cry, to confess, to beg for forgiveness. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at him, eyes filled with things I couldn't say, and whispered, "We need to reconnect. I don't want to lose us." And to my surprise, he didn't pull away. He nodded. That small moment was a spark. Over the next few weeks, we started taking slow steps toward each other again. Cooking together, laughing over old movies, putting our phones away during dinner. And then one night, Matt held me close and said something that shook me. "I know I've taken you for granted lately. I am sorry. I just didn't realize how far apart we'd gotten." That broke me in a different way, because he was apologizing for something I was equally guilty of, maybe more. He was trying. And meanwhile, I was hiding the worst version of myself behind new efforts to repair the damage I had helped create. I never responded to Darren's message, and he never sent another one. In many ways, he disappeared. I unfollowed him on social media, deleted our old group photos, removed every trace of him from my life, at least on the surface. But the truth? He still existed in the silence between my breaths, in the mirror I avoided when I was alone, in the guilt that whispered every time Matt kissed me goodnight. He was the face of a mistake I'd never fully forgive myself for. And still, I chose not to confess. Some people will say that's weak, cowardly. That true love requires honesty, even if it breaks everything. But for me, the honesty I needed was internal. I didn't need to destroy Matt to punish myself. I was already doing that in my own way. One afternoon, after a long walk with Matt and our dog, I sat on our porch watching the sunset. The sky was pink, soft, forgiving. Matt brought me tea and kissed my forehead without saying a word. And in that moment, I realized some sins don't get erased. They just become part of your shadow. You learn to walk with it. You learn to do better. Not because you're free of guilt, but because guilt can sometimes teach you how to love more carefully. Months passed. Seasons shifted. From the outside, nothing seemed out of place. My marriage looked whole again, perhaps even stronger. We had found our rhythm. We traveled. We laughed again. We held hands in public like we did when we were first dating. And to anyone looking in, we were the picture of stability, of happiness. But I knew better. Deep inside, I still carried the memory of that night. Not as a romantic fantasy, not as temptation, but as a quiet scar that never fully closed. Darren faded into the background of our lives like a shadow that had overstayed its welcome. Matt eventually stopped bringing him up. We drifted, he'd say if someone asked. People change. It was easier that way. Cleaner. No me citrus. No confrontación. And I never told Matt what really happened. I came close once. We were on the balcony of a small inn by the coast, wrapped in blankets, drinking coffee. He was sharing some childhood story, laughing softly, completely at ease. And I almost did it. I opened my mouth to speak, but then I looked at him, at the lines on his face, at the trust in his eyes. And I chose silence. Because sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it shatters a world you've just barely begun to rebuild. I chose to protect that world, not because I deserved to, but because he did. The real ending of this story isn't about betrayal. It's about realization. I realized that the line between loyalty and loneliness is thinner than anyone wants to admit. That emotional neglect in a marriage can be just as dangerous as dishonesty. That sometimes the worst mistakes come from the most human places, places of yearning, of being unseen, of wanting to feel alive again. But I also realized that mistakes don't have to define us. What we do after, the rebuilding, the reckoning, the commitment to never cross that line again, that's what shapes who we become. To this day, Matt has no idea. I don't know if I'll ever tell him. Maybe one day, when we're older and the stakes are different. Or maybe I'll take it to my grave, buried under layers of choices and regrets and love that was real, even when I was lost. This story isn't a warning about men like Darren. It's a warning about the quiet spaces in a marriage, the empty moments, the slow fade, the doors you don't realize are opening until you've already stepped through them. So if you're listening to this wondering if it could happen to you, the answer is yes, it can. Not because you're bad, but because you're human. And that's what makes forgiveness of others and of ourselves the hardest, most beautiful part of being alive. 6.